you're watching the Screaming Fish here, people, and once again I'm here for you guys with yet another video, and welcome to my continuation of my series of Star Wars reviews leading up to The Last Jedi. So, as you can tell by the clearly very obvious title at the bottom of the screen, at least I think it's at the bottom of the screen, we're reviewing Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back. Finally. So, yep, I make do all my promises. I'm going to review all of these movies as I promised. I'm not going to do that thing again like I used to ages ago, where I'd say I'd do something and then I'd not do something, and yeah, anyway, let's get on with the review, shall we? So, I can't even begin to imagine what it must have been like to be a Star Wars fan waiting for this movie to come out. There was no internet back then. The only way you could even find out information about the making of this film was in a newspaper or on TV. After Star Wars exploded into pop culture and captured the hearts of many, I don't think it's any surprise that the next installment in the franchise was met with huge anticipation from fans and general moviegoers alike. Reporters were actually trying to find out things about this movie. They were trying to figure out what it was about. Star Wars was huge. It changed the way people anticipate movies. It changed the way people thought and wrote about movies. And it changed the way filmmakers and audiences perceive cinema today. 3 years. That's how long people had to wait for this movie. 3 long years of build-up and anticipation. If I had existed in the late 70s leading up to 1980, I would more than likely be one of the few people that were wondering how this movie was going to go, considering George Lucas, the man who created Star Wars, wasn't even directing or writing. In fact, this time, the directing duty was left to Irvin Kershner, while the script would be written by Lawrence Kasdan and Leigh Brackett, with George Lucas providing the ideas for the story. I actually can't blame Lucas for wanting to take a back seat for this one, because he had a real rough time making the first movie. Like I said in my review for Star Wars, he was constantly trying to prove himself to people. At the time, a lot of people who were involved with the making of this film didn't quite understand his vision. He was hospitalized several times due to emotional stress and the pressure he faced while making this film. When I first watched this film, it was literally minutes after my dad had sat me down for the first time to watch Star Wars with him. I could not wait to see another one after the amazingness that was Star Wars, or as it's now called, Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope, for some reason. I'm going to be completely honest with you guys right here. The Empire Strikes Back has been my favourite movie of all time for as long as I can remember. This is the film that made me want to break into the film industry, and make me want to have a career in that industry. This is the movie I have watched more times than any other movie I have ever watched. When you ask a hardcore Star Wars fan what their favourite Star Wars movie is, 9 times out of 10 they will say The Empire Strikes Back, and part of the reason for that, for myself anyway, is the approach that the filmmakers went with this film. One of the things the first Star Wars movie did so brilliantly was that it continued to expand the world, and The Empire Strikes Back does the exact same thing, only this time the characters themselves are expanding as well as the Star Wars universe itself. This movie took Luke, Han, Leia, and particularly Darth Vader to emotional heights that we as the audience had never seen them at before. The Empire Strikes Back starts off with Luke riding a Tauntaun, which if you think about it is sort of like a cross between a goat and a horse, only with 2 legs. We learn that the rebels have now moved their base to planet Hoth, which is this huge planet that is covered entirely in snow and ice. Every time I see that shot of Luke riding the Tauntaun across the snow, I can't help but admire the cinematography. The Tauntaun itself looks fantastic, and the shot in general is beautiful to look at. I also love how it starts off seemingly as just an average patrol of the landscape, and then when out of nowhere Luke is attacked by this huge monster called the Wampa. Every time that scene gets me, I just jump instantaneously because it's so out of nowhere, and it really catches me off guard despite the fact that I have seen this film more times than I can remember. They don't even show the monster in the scene, you only see a few glimpses of its hand as it knocks out Luke and kills the Tauntaun. To me, that scene perfectly sets up the tone of what's to come. Despite the fact that this is a much darker film than the first movie, The Empire Strikes Back is surprisingly funnier than the first Star Wars movie. The humour in this movie is priceless, particularly the banter between Han and Leia. The insults these two throw at each other become increasingly funny as the scenes progress. I also love how when Han is about to go out and find Luke after he's taken by the Wampa, a rebel soldier comes up to him and tells him he might freeze to death out there, and then Han just simply responds, "Then I'll see you in hell!" That scene is it's just awesome. Han Solo was a badass in the first film, and he takes it to the next level in this film. He does so many amazing things in this movie, but my favourite Han Solo scene in this movie has to be when it's revealed that the Empire are on Cloud City. The doors open and Vader stands up from the table, and without a second thought, Han grabs his blaster and starts shooting Vader. He doesn't care if Darth Vader can use the Force, or if he has a lightsaber. He wants to kill him. His attempt to kill Vader does fail, of course, because Vader blocks his shots with his hands, but it's so cool that Han was willing to do that. Before I talk more about Cloud City, I just want to express how much I love the structure of The Empire Strikes Back. This isn't the kind of sequel where it starts off small and then has a huge final battle at the end. This instead opts to have the huge battle much earlier in the film, and then have the rest of the film be about our heroes trying to escape the Empire and evade capture, while Luke, of course, goes on a journey of his own. The Empire in this film are truly a force to be reckoned with. In the first movie, we felt the size and impact of the Death Star. The Empire are portrayed as this huge force that is just overwhelming the rebels, even though in the last movie, they lost their ultimate weapon. Our heroes lose pretty much throughout the film. The Empire take over their base on Hoth after a huge battle. The Millennium Falcon is always broken and not working properly, and our heroes are always on the run from the Empire for the vast majority of the film. Our heroes are vulnerable in this film. They can get hurt or even die. They can lose. And you can feel the weight of that all the time. The Battle of Hoth is one of the most spectacular action sequences ever put to film. It's a lot of fun to watch, particularly when the snowspeeders are using their tow cables to bring down these huge AT-ATs. This is also a really tense scene. The AT-ATs are kind of like giant robot camels, but my days, they are huge. The scene becomes increasingly more tense as these walkers weigh down on these rebels who are desperately trying to get away from these things. The shot of the rebel soldiers running for their lives as these three AT-ATs close in on them is staggering. My mouth literally dropped when I first saw that. Not only because of how cool the shot is, but also because I felt the weight of the Empire overwhelming these rebels. The Death Star sequence was thrilling and revolutionary, but it was all focused on the ships and people just watching from the planet's surface. In the Battle of Hoth, literally everyone is involved. Luke's leading a squad of snowspeeders to take down the walkers. Han's trying to make sure that Leia gets out okay, and Leia is trying to make sure that her troops get out okay. And because everyone's involved, it makes this sequence so much more thrilling. The asteroid sequence still to this day looks brilliant. The whole sequence still gives me chills every time I watch it. Watching the Millennium Falcon dodging all the asteroids and the TIE fighters closing in on them, it's so thrilling, and John Williams' score more than elevates the tension in this scene. Darth Vader is legitimately terrifying in this movie. If you fail him, or mess with him, he will kill you. He's taking out his own people left and right, and that's even shown in the facial expressions of every Imperial that's talking to Vader in the scene. They always have this tense and nervous look on their faces, and I'm 100% certain that they're thinking, he's gonna kill me. He's gonna freaking kill me! That really helps to elevate the fear and terror that Darth Vader inflicts on not only his enemies, but even his own people. Some might view this as a little over the top nowadays, but to me, this makes for a very compelling villain, and one that you can actually fear. The Empire Strikes Back was also the movie that gave us our first look at the one person that keeps Vader on a tight leash. There's one scene where Vader is talking with the Emperor, who of course at this point is basically a giant holographic head. I've always liked this scene not only because we're finally introduced to the Emperor, but also because it sets up some really dark but awesome things to come in the future. The Empire Strikes Back is a beautiful movie. Even when you watch the original cut before the special editions came out, it still looks amazing. Everything from the visual effects to the props and costumes. It all looks fantastic. Dagobah is one of the greatest film sets ever constructed. As soon as Luke and R2 crash land on Dagobah, you feel as if you're in a strange, otherworldly and real planet. There's not one thing about this set that sticks out to me. It all looks and feels real. This sequence, of course, leads to the introduction of one of the greatest movie characters of all time, Yoda. Yoda is one of the coolest movie characters ever, and he's not even real. It's a puppet. The things Frank Oz and his team did with this character is still mind-blowing to this day. The writing for this character, it's great. It's just great. When you first meet him, he's hilarious. Yoda is so funny in this movie. It makes us care for this little guy, and at that point, you don't even know that he is in fact Yoda. As soon as we learn that he is in fact the Jedi Master, he takes on this wise and wizard-like appearance, and this of course leads to Yoda actually training Luke in the ways of the Jedi. This movie had already nailed the combat, the battles, and the whole epic feel of this universe perfectly. However, what this film does even better was exploring the tense and emotional depths of Yoda's way of teaching the ways of the Jedi. The scenes where Yoda is training Luke are honestly riveting. There are some very cool sequences such as Luke running around the forest with Yoda on his back, and of course the absolutely mind-bending scene where Yoda lifts Luke's crashed X-Wing out of the water, which ends with one of the greatest insults of all time. In these scenes we get to learn more about what it means to be a Jedi, and of course the constant struggle between the light and dark side of the Force. One of the darkest sequences in this movie is when Luke enters a cave during his training with Yoda and he finds what he thinks is Darth Vader, and they have a very brief lightsaber battle which ends with Luke cutting off his head. But then Darth Vader's helmet explodes, and it's Luke's head inside the helmet. This sequence in particular is a perfect example of how brave these filmmakers were to add metaphorical imagery. Doing this risked making the film too confusing for general audiences, but I think it's a great way to set up Luke's confrontation with Vader, which I'll talk more about in a bit. The Empire Strikes Back also introduced us to bounty hunters. We have Bosk, we have IG-88, we have Dengar! Yeah, I know all their names. I'm such a nerd. And of course we're introduced to Boba Fett, one of the most iconic Star Wars characters of all time. I've always loved how Vader specifically points at Boba Fett and tells him he doesn't want any disintegrations. Within that one shot, you know that Boba Fett has a reputation. Vader, of all people, knows of his reputation, so you can pretty much see where that could lead. Finally, I can talk about Cloud City. So Han, Leia, and Co. finally make it to Cloud City, where we are introduced to Lando Calrissian, who is one of my favourite characters in this entire franchise. Instantaneously, Billy D. Williams turns on those player vibes. Lando is such a likeable and funny character, from the way he interacts with Leia or the way he interacts with Han and Chewie. He's awesome. He's just awesome. Cloud City is beautiful. It's one of the coolest effects I've ever seen. The imagery is terrific, and it just looks like a really, really cool place. So after we learn that the Empire are in fact on Cloud City with aid from Lando, this leads to one of the most emotional scenes, if not the most emotional scene in the entire franchise. The scene where Han is being frozen in carbonate almost always has me in tears. Harrison Ford's suggested line of, "I know," when Leia says, "I love you." That stuff is just great, and emotionally powerful. Luke approaching Darth Vader in that really dark room is some of the best filmmaking I have ever seen. The darkness around him, there's barely any music, and even the way Luke looks at his blaster, knowing that it's not going to do him any good here. It's the best way to set up one of the greatest confrontations in cinematic history. Every time I watch that scene, I get a jump every time Vader starts talking because the scene is so tense. Luke going in with his overconfidence and Vader is just stood there deflecting his blows as calmly as possible. He overpowers Luke with just his mastery over the Force, literally throwing objects at him left and right. This lightsaber fight is easily better than the lightsaber fight we got in the first movie. The choreography is much better, and of course it's much longer. The sets in this scene are amazing, and it's so freaking emotional. This, as many of you know, led to probably the greatest twist of all time. The reveal that Darth Vader is in fact Luke's father. I remember my initial reaction to that scene very well. My mouth actually dropped, and that's really saying something considering my dad actually spoiled it for me before I even watched the movie. So, thanks, Dad. This one scene takes our heroes and villains to even darker places. It's so emotional and chilling hearing Vader speak those words. "No, I am your father." Apologies for my terrible Darth Vader impression. Anyway, when this movie ended, it left people wanting more. Leia and Co rescue Luke and they finally escape the Empire's grasp. Han Solo is frozen in carbonite though, and Boba Fett is taking him to God knows where. The Empire Strikes Back is one of the fastest movies ever made. There is not a single dull moment. It's a 2-hour movie that feels like it's minutes long. The Empire Strikes Back is one of the greatest cinematic achievements of all time, and of course, as I said at the beginning of this video, my favourite movie of all time. So guys, those are my thoughts on The Empire Strikes Back. I do hope you enjoyed this video. It's my favourite movie of all time, and I still love it just as much as I did back then. So, yeah. I don't really need to say anything more because I've spent at least 13 minutes or more praising the hell out of it. But, yeah, before you ask where my Return of the Jedi review is, that's going to be coming very soon, sometime in the future. So, yeah, you can expect to see that, as well as a few other videos. I'm planning on doing a review of the original Stephen King's It in celebration of the release of the new It, the remake It. It's going to be weird saying the title of that movie when it comes out, like, this movie is and it's really, you know, it's kind of going to be really hard to talk about it when it's literally just called It. But anyway, enough about that. Once again, I do hope you enjoyed this video. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow me on Facebook and Instagram. I think that's all of it. Anyway, so what did you think of Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back? Did you think it was good? Did you think it was bad? Did you think it was somewhere in the middle? Please leave your thoughts down in the comments below, and I will indeed see you guys in the next one. So, bye.